Dr. Sayers, one of my biggest takeaways when we went overseas, we were in Germany. I forget the stadium. I think it might be HSC Berth. I forget the stadium. We were on a tour, and the tour guide was explaining that the fans own this team.
Yeah.
Now, I was quiet for the whole trip. I think that might have been the first time I spoke up. I said, excuse me? I said, you mean to tell me there's not some white guy in a suit up here that owns this whole thing? They said, no, not in the Bundesliga.
Yeah.
There's a rule called 50+1 that ensures that the fans owns the team, which is very different than the American model, where you have superstar owners like Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys, Mark Cuban and the Dallas Mavericks, infamous guys like Robert Sarver, who just got in trouble, who owns the Phoenix Suns.
Yeah.
The fans own these teams, Dr. Sayers. Can you please help us understand what is this 50+1 rule? What does it mean that the fans own these teams?
It's unique to Germany, this model, and it's got many benefits. But also globally, some would argue drawbacks.
Okay.
I think it's wonderful. So the fan ownership groups have a significant stake in how the club is run. And decisions that impact the direction of the club, they have a voice. They have members that sit with the board, so to speak, that is a seat at the table in the discussions that involve the direction of the club. It's still very much community-based in Germany, the role of football in society.
Okay.
In a different way and to a greater extent than it is in other European countries that do have the ownership model that you're referring to. There's Chelsea's new owner. So Chelsea, their previous owner is Roman Abramovich, Russian oligarch, and he was forced to sell the club within the last year because of his ties to Putin. And the British government were going to seize all Abramovich's assets, which include Chelsea, because he owned them. So he sold them. And Chelsea known as an American guy, and he made some interesting comments in the last couple of weeks in terms of what he thinks about the Premier League and showed that he doesn't really understand it. It's been an interesting adjustment for him, I think.
Okay.
And the suggesting things like an East versus West All-Star game or a North versus South All-Star game, I think, like they have in baseball, but there's just no place for it in the calendar. And because the sport operates differently, it wouldn't be a welcome addition to the calendar. Okay. Anyway, it's sidebar. So he now is the owner of Chelsea. Liverpool are actually owned by John Henry and the same consortium that owns the Boston Red Sox. So there's more and more American owners coming into the game, but they do have this ownership model. There are British owners, there are owners from the Middle East of certain clubs. But Germany is different in the sense that none of those types of ownership groups or owners could go and take over a German club because of the model. 50+1 refers to at least 51% of the team being owned by, again, the fans. Yeah, so they can't. So no other owner can have majority ownership.
But that's when you say owned by the fans, does that mean like who makes the decision on who gets traded? Who makes the decision on who hires the coach? Like, how do the fans impact those decisions?
There'll be a representative of the fans on the board, and the board will delegate that responsibility typically. So in terms of making decisions to trade players and to buy and sell players, the model can vary from club to club. It might be it might be the sporting director, it might be the head coach themselves, it might be a little team of those two, or maybe a slightly bigger team. But there'll be people delegated and appointed to make those type of decisions. But who makes those decisions will be dictated by the board, and the fans will have representation on that board.
They can vote on that board?
Yeah. A member that represents the fans group will vote on that board.
And is this similar to like political elections here in America? They have a certain tenure, 4 years or so? Or if the fans become unhappy, what course of action can they take with the board member representing them?
They can that board member will be their voice. I think it varies slightly from club to club.
But if they're unhappy with the board member, how can they get them out of there? Or?
I don't know that.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting one to look at. One of the key benefits for those fans is ticket prices. And they're typically all on board with this. Not just the fans groups, but the other owners of the club, the other members of those boards that make up the ownership committee of the club. That season tickets are much cheaper than everywhere else.
Bundesliga has some of the highest attendance in the world, their league.
Yeah.
And is it because of this model and keeping tickets price lows and keeping the fans in mind and everything that they do?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of factors. Ticket prices is a massive one. You'll typically hear that at the bigger clubs in other countries in Europe, the regular fan, which is a bit of a cliche, but it's football at its roots was working class, the 1800s to the early 1900s, and it was very community based. A lot of the players that played for a local team would be from that area, or the fans obviously be from that area, and they go and support the team. As the game exploded, 70s, 80s, the start of that, but specifically from the 90s onwards, as the game exploded and became this multi-billion-dollar industry, opportunistic business people identified that and realized that soccer was a vehicle to make a lot of money. You could charge higher prices and fans would pay it. Players could demand more money and clubs would pay it. TV contracts got higher and higher, and now they're in the billions. So everything about the game became more expensive.
Right.
And so you hear that quite a lot, particularly in Britain, that the fans have been the fans that the demographic that used to attend matches is now very different than it is now.
Right.
And that's not the case in Germany. Because of the fans' involvement in the running of the clubs, but also other members involved in the running of the club also acknowledge that the fans are very important and an important important members of the community.
Yes.
And the club is there for them, and have agreed to keep ticket prices low. The cost, Bayern Munich are one of the biggest clubs in the world, certainly the biggest club in Germany and the most successful club in Germany. The ticket price difference between Bayern Munich and, say, Arsenal and Chelsea in England or Paris Saint-Germain in France is very significant.
Yes.
It's and German football has very much retained its community identity through schemes like that.
It has. And again, they experience some of the best ticket sales in the world when it comes to a football league. They have some of the highest viewership, because things are done with the fan in mind.
Yeah.
How does that compare to what we see in the American sports, where a lot of these teams are just run by an oligarch? Everything is run through one guy. What do you think of that model? And you've seen some guys do nefarious things with that power.
Yes, you have. And there's obviously no place for that in any walk of life, in any business, and in any sport. Within that, as you say, within that structure and that model, there are different approaches to it. It's Arthur Blank would be an example in Atlanta Falcons and Atlanta United.
Okay.
And he announced and followed through with the subsidization of concessions. So Atlanta United, the MLS season runs March to November. Obviously, the NFL season runs September to February. Because when the Atlanta United were created, expansion team, and were due to start play, I think it was 2017, they were still building Mercedes-Benz Stadium in the spring. That was due to open for the Falcons in the fall. But they're going to share that stadium. They do share that stadium now. At that point, the plan was that they would go on and share that stadium. But Atlanta United needed somewhere to play from March onwards, so they played all their games at Georgia Tech's football stadium. I remember going to the opening game, Atlanta United versus New York Red Bull.
Wow.
And the fan community in Atlanta is excellent. Now Mercedes-Benz Stadium's open, they get upwards of 50,000 to some games, which is on a par with a lot of the major European stadiums. And they've embraced Arthur Blank and he's embraced them, and he's subsidised all the concessions at the stadium. So you go to some stadiums, you know, for a piece of food or for a beer or a drink, it's pretty expensive. It's not the case in Atlanta because he agreed to keep those prices low for the fans, which they appreciated and reciprocated with their support. So there obviously still is some good that can be done in those ownership structures,
right.
But it's up to the one person as to whether he wants to do that or not.
Now, what are the people that are opposed to the 50+1 rule saying? What arguments are they making? I believe they're saying like not enough money is being made in some of these places.
Yeah, they're saying it's holding the clubs back because the more money the club makes, the more they can spend on quality players, on better players, should I say, and the more they can then compete at the highest level. But if the club is run this way and our objective is to keep costs low, one of our objectives is to keep costs low, then that reduces the amount of money coming back into the club. Right. Bayern Munich have sort of broken that mold somewhat because they have started charging higher prices for certain things, and they have pushed the boundaries of the 50+1 rule and even operate outside of it in some ways. And they have obviously managed to still compete at the very highest level. They've won the Champions League several times. But even then, you still hear that argument that Bayern Munich could have even more revenue if they were to be operated in the same way that say some of the London clubs are. But that would be the primary pushback, was that the game is moving forward and this system isn't. But it is still very much there for the fans, which is wonderful.
Yes. Like with anything, positives and negatives.
Yes,
right?
100%.